Hey folks, this is Kelani. With all of the changes coming to leveling with patch 7.3.5, it's understandable that a few people might be a little concerned that it's going to take a little bit longer to level any characters or alts that you haven't got to max level yet. Obviously, these changes will also affect how long it takes to level any allied races that you decide to level when they're finally made available. But fear not, even though it seems like leveling might take a little longer overall with these changes, some of the system changes introduce some interesting possibilities which we can use to our full advantage to make leveling as painless as possible. So let's have a look at how you can go from 1 to max as quickly as possible when patch 7.3.5 hits live servers. Remember that speed is our goal here. If you'd rather just work your way through the quests at your own pace without worrying about time, that's perfectly fine too. The first thing you want to do is get your hands on as many sources of bonus experience as possible. You're going to want a full set of heirlooms, at the very least the pieces which provide bonus experience. Even though heirlooms have had their power reined in a little bit, the bonus experience is going to outweigh basically anything else you can find on gear when it comes to leveling quickly. It's also nice to not have to worry about a few slots of gear while blowing through levels. There are a few other forms of bonus experience, but they're not as easy as heirlooms to obtain. Keep an eye on the calendar to see if any holiday events are going on or if the Dark Moon Fair is available. The Dark Moon Fair can provide you with a 10% bonus experience buff, and a few seasonal holidays can provide some bonuses too. So if something's on the calendar, be sure to make full use of it. You can also grab some experience potions from the auction house. The Elixir of the Rapid Mind will grant you 300% bonus experience for 15 minutes. Honestly, this one probably isn't worth it unless you have a lot of gold just lying around, because these potions will only become more and more expensive. Personally, I wouldn't bother with them. Another way to get your hands on 300% experience is to recruit a friend, which you can either do with a friend or you can actually just recruit yourself. Playing 2 accounts at the same time isn't exactly ideal unless you take the extra steps to setting up multi-boxing, but it can be a handy dandy way to get some alts leveled incredibly quickly. You can also have someone else boost your 2 characters through dungeons, but we'll talk a little bit about that later. If you're going to end up questing in any capacity, you should also pick up the Heirloom Maps, which give you all of the flight paths for Kalimdor and the Eastern Kingdoms. You might be surprised how much time you spend just travelling from place to place, especially before you can fly. Having all of the flight paths available so you can just skip all of the walking will carve time off your levelling speed. So let's break this down by role, because depending on what class you're playing and what roles are available to you, you might have some faster options open to you. If you're playing a tank or a healer, or a grouping with a tank or a healer, dungeons are still the fastest experience until around level 80. At that point you can start the Mists of Pandaria quests thanks to the new scaling, but dungeons are still pretty quick and honestly are just easier in general to grind through. Even if dungeons take a little longer to complete after the changes are implemented, the amount of experience you gain has also been increased, which should balance things out a little more. Because everything scales to each player individually, you can also group up with a wider variety of player levels, so that's pretty handy. When you get to level 90 and can start the Warlords of Draenor stuff, you can still run dungeons and work your way to level 98 fairly quickly, but it's usually much faster to quest a little and complete as many bonus objectives as you can on the Warlords of Draenor maps. Leveling from 90 to 98 is fairly quick either way, and then you should just quest through the Broken Isles. If you're leveling a class that can't tank or heal and aren't lucky enough to be rolling with a friend, you're going to have a little longer of a leveling trip. Thankfully, the scaling changes work so much in your favour. Remember queuing up for a dungeon and questing through a leveling zone while waiting for it to pop, and when it finally pops and you work your way through the dungeon, you come out of it a few levels ahead of the quests you were trying to complete, so now any quests you already have in your log are probably worth less experience, and you should also try to run off to another questing area because you just out-leveled this one. That's no longer a thing. Heck, you could stay in Westfall or the Barrens until you're level 60 if your dungeon queues pop fast enough. So for DPS players without a skip the queue friend, just quest to your heart's content while waiting on dungeons. Sign up as often as you can and quest away. You could be questing in Westfall and getting into Zul'Farrak or Stratholme, and your quests will still be level appropriate. It's an amazingly fantastic change, and it makes leveling as a DPS so much smoother and ultimately faster. Another option that you have is dungeon boosting, where you have a higher level character just plow through a dungeon over and over. There's some interesting potential here. Dungeons scale up to the max level of your expansion set, so vanilla dungeons all scale to 60, Burning Crusade and Wrath dungeons all scale to 80, and Kata and Mist dungeons all scale to 90. So you could run through Ragefire Chasm constantly and the mobs will still grant level appropriate experience. You can level all the way from 1 to 60 in just Ragefire Chasm if you want to. There is one problem with this setup though, and it's pretty big. Right now the bonus experience for completing a dungeon doesn't seem to scale with your level, so while the monsters will grant you a good amount of experience all the way up to level 60, finishing the dungeon won't. I ran RFC on a level 26 and the bonus experience was a piddly 600. That's not worth it by a long shot, so if you do choose to boost through dungeons, you might have to change dungeons just as often as before, regardless of the new scaling in place. I can see how this could have been implemented purposefully to discourage people from just farming one dungeon over and over and over again, but if the rest of the dungeon scales, I would say the completion experience should scale as well. Personally, I don't think boosting dungeons is really worth it, unless you have Recruit a Friend active. If you have a high-level friend who is willing to give you a hand, maybe in return for the favour in the future or for a bag full of gold, you can play your 2 accounts very easily while they boost you through the dungeons. If you're super crazy, you can even run 3 accounts yourself. 2 which are linked with RAF and a 3rd with a high-level character. Typically, you'll get 2 to 3 levels per dungeon run, and most can be completed in under 5 minutes. You can either follow the booster through the dungeon or just sit at the start of the instance and you'll get experience for the dungeon completion. Then you can just run out and summon your booster back out, reset the instance and go again. This method is typically the fastest and most reliable, as you don't really have to play your newbie accounts at all. Just sit back and relax, but most importantly, you can't die. Having one of your toons die in a run is incredibly frustrating and time consuming to fix. Honestly, if the completion experience scaled to your level, you could hit 60 in record time with Recruit a Friend and dungeon boosting. You could literally just sit in one spot until you're level 60, then move to TBC or Wrath and do the same dungeon over and over until 80, rinse repeat for Kata or Mist dungeons. I think that might be a little too broken, so I wouldn't be too surprised if the completion experience stays the way it is currently on PTR and doesn't end up scaling with your level. Setting up Recruit a Friend and boosting dungeons takes a little bit of extra thought and effort, but I've done this a few times now and can go from 1 to 90 in 5 to 6 hours of playtime. The dungeon scaling changes will make this so much easier to pull off, especially after level 60. Interestingly, one of the biggest issues with Recruit a Friend questing was out-leveling zones way too fast. Having to hop from quest hub to quest hub every few quests because you level so quickly with Recruit a Friend was the reason people turned to dungeon boosting. That problem just vanishes thanks to the world scaling technology, so maybe Recruit a Friend questing would be faster than dungeon boosting when all is said and done. Obviously, questing with 2 characters would be harder and more cumbersome if you're recruiting yourself, but at least that's a viable option now. That's also an amazing change for anyone who recruits somebody into the game. They can actually complete some leveling zones now without feeling weird about it if they decide to use Recruit a Friend. So if you want to level fast after patch 735 goes live, get yourself set up with RAF and boost some dungeons. If that's out of reach, play a tank or healer and run dungeons non-stop until you're ready to take on Legion content, and if you're not a tank or healer and don't have a friend or 2 to level a character with, run a few dungeons while questing through whichever leveling zones you prefer, and remember to grab those Heirloom Maps. They'll save you hours of walking. And that's it for this video. Are you going to level up before patch 735 goes live, or try things out after all the changes are in place? Leave all your thoughts in the comments section below. Remember to leave a like just below the video before you leave, and if you want to see more, make sure to subscribe. But apart from that, thanks for watching folks, good luck and have fun, and as always I will see you next time.